we have with us Professor Ali Riaz. He's a person of prodigious intellectual parts, as you'll soon find out. He's chair and professor in the Department of Government and Politics, Illinois State. He's rated very high in the United States as an expert on conflict resolution, democracy, and South Asia. He's also held in very high esteem in the State Department, by the way, and I recall last year we were together at a tabletop discussion on Bangladesh organized by the US government in DC. In fact, the book that introduced him to me is called God Willing, Islamism in Bangladesh, and it's a fascinating read. He's written many since then. He has been to ISAS before, a couple of years ago, to speak at one of our seminars, and it's my privilege to welcome him again and pass him the microphone. Yes.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back. I mean, as a matter of fact, as I was recalling, my first visit to the Institute was when it was practically being started. It was around 2005 that I first visited. It was a very small place. Then Rahul and I were talking about that there are a few, 3 rooms and few cubicles. That's how I recall the Institute started. And since then I've visited a couple of more times, and thanks to the Institute. Subrata, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. What I'm going to talk today is to give a briefer version of what seems to be the situation in Bangladesh, current political situation in Bangladesh, and where it is heading, particularly what are the scenarios going forward, and that's what I'm calling the Bangladesh moving ahead or walking back. I will try to address 3 questions today. There is democracy in Bangladesh on a reverse course. The second one is there a culture of intolerance being engendered? And the third one is will creeping extremisms create an ineffaceable schism within the nation? I mean, these are the 3 questions that seems to me is very important at this moment. And all of them have larger implication beyond Bangladesh, but definitely these are the questions that need to be looked into. And to start with the current political situation or the political landscape, first of all, those of us who are familiar with Bangladesh, it's a reminder that the Bangladesh political landscape is largely what I call a de facto 2-party system. There are 2 major political parties. Of course, there are smaller political parties too, but 2 parties, one is Awami League, which is currently the incumbent, and another is Bangladesh Nationalist Party, BNP, which was previously on more than 2 occasions in power, and currently is in the opposition. Within this 2-party system, there are 2 other smaller parties. One is led by former dictator General Rashad, and another is the largest Islamist party in Bangladesh called Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh, or Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami as they are now known. But over the last 2 years, if you take 2013 as a starting point or point of departure, what we are witnessing is political instability, heightened violence, blatant violation of human rights, growing extremism, flawed elections, not only one, more than one, and maybe more worrisome is the shrinking democratic space. And as Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry has mentioned, the economic progress is notwithstanding that. Those is going on, though it has taken hit. I mean, the projected growth rate has to be revised and scaled down. Yes, Bangladesh is making enormous progress in terms of economic growth, but if we are looking at the political aspect of it, the political scene, these are the things that we see. And what we see is the 91 days of mayhem in the beginning 4th of January this year. For 91 days, 3 months, 138 lives were lost in heightened political violence. $2.2 billion just gone. 74 of them died in bomb attacks or burning vehicles, mostly organized, or at least in support of the opposition party, though they decline, they allege that the government is to blame, at least in part. But most of them were done in support of the blockade and the general strike that the opposition nationalist party called. 10 died in clashes with either law enforcement agencies, which one is the police, another is the elite force called Rapid Action Battalion, and of course Bangladesh Border Guards, which is supposed to guarding the border, but we have seen them being used for law enforcement as well, and between the supporter of the government and the opposition. 37 people were killed, what government described as encounters or crossfire, which is basically official description for justifying extrajudicial killing. And this is the number that I would request you to look very closely. 37 people in 91 days we are talking about. And this is not the first time that we have seen such a heightened political violence in Bangladesh. In 2013, we have seen since February 2013, throughout the whole period, there has been enormous violence throughout the country. Why this recurrence of violence? Why since 2013 we have seen one episode of 2013, then at the end of the 2013, leading up to the election, there was another episode of violence, a prolonged violence of 60 days or so, and then we have seen in 2015. Why? I think there are three reasons. First of all is the absence of trust among the major political parties. The opposition and the incumbent, as two political parties, they never have trusted each other, despite the fact the power has alternated between them since 1991 when the democratization process started. Second thing is the lack of a consensus on the modus operandi of holding an inclusive national election. How to hold an election which can be participated by all parties, can be accepted the result, and of course can make sure that the governing party has the legitimacy that they require to govern. And the third one is the scarcity of institutions to protect the fundamental rights of the citizen, including exercising the right to vote freely. Because the institution, and here I would like to underscore the point that I'm talking about institution. There is very few institutions in Bangladesh, unfortunately, that can guarantee the protection of human rights. So these are the three elements which I think are the heart of this current political situation. Now, I said, is democracy on a reverse course? So this is my question. Why do I ask this question? I ask because of these two developments that we have seen since 2011 to be precise. First of all, an amendment to a constitution. Previously, for three occasions, 1991, 96, and 2001, and then 2008, the fourth time, but more so within the constitutional proviso in 1996, which was included into Bangladesh constitution, which allowed Bangladesh to have three fairly organized elections: 96, 2001, 2008. In each case, power alternated, but more importantly, the election was accepted and heralded as by international observers and the Bangladeshis. Most importantly, Bangladeshi voters felt that they had the right, they have exercised, and the results reflect their choice, which was removed in 2011 by the current incumbent, saying that it doesn't happen in other democracy, because in other quote-unquote parliamentary democracy, the incumbent act as interim government, so that should be the case, as opposed to creating an interim government. The interim government, which was under what was called as caretaker government, was comprised of technocrats, non-partisan, and not for an indefinite period. Their only and primary responsibility was to organize a fair election, which can be participated, and that is what happened. In case of 96, in case of 2001, in case of 2008, that's what happened. So the caretaker government, despite, yes, it is not a completely foolproof system. No system is foolproof. There are many limitations. And I understand that there are more rooms to improve, but in 2011 it was scrapped. And the opposition, BNP, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, said they're not going to, they have threatened to boycott the election unless it was restored. And through the 2013, that is the issue, among others, that has pushed Bangladesh into a very violent situation. And then we saw the election in 2014. This election was boycotted by opposition, not only major opposition. Out of 40 political parties that are registered with Bangladesh Election Commission, only 12 of them participated, 28 of them, including the major opposition party. And in my consideration, 2040 election is the most consequential election it might turn out to be in the history of Bangladesh. Why? Let me give you 4 set of data that will tell you how that should be put on perspective. 2014 election was the 10th parliamentary election in Bangladesh. And if you look at the chart that I'm showing in terms of the parties participated, in 1973 it was 14, but since 1991, what we have seen, particularly since 1996, if you look at the numbers, there are 81 political parties participated in 1996. An election, yes, there was an effort, or there was an election which was boycotted by the opposition. But if you take the parties, all parties participated in election, there have been 81 parties in 1996, 54, 38. In 2014, only 12 political parties participated. Second, number of candidates. 2008 election, there are 52 candidates for 300 openly contested seats. This has came down to 543 because there is very few candidates, given the absence of the participation of the opposition. Third set of data. This is the most striking part of it. Out of 300 seats, 153 candidates were, or 153 seats were decided without casting a single ballot, because they were elected unopposed. A parliament whose majority was elected not by anybody, by simply not having a candidate against them. 153 of them. How unusual is that? Look at the previous 3 elections. 0, 0, 0. All previous 3 elections in 1996, 2001 and 2008, where all political parties participated, and election was considered as a, if not flawless, acceptable and free, representing the will of the people, not a single case of unopposed victory. Here, more than half of the parliament was selected. Look at the voter turnout. Bangladeshis seems to like to go to the polling station and cast their vote. They do it with quite a festivity. And if you look at the last 2008 election, 85.26% was the voter turnout. 85.26%. And in Bangladesh, you don't, it's not requirement. You're not going to be fined if you don't show up in the election booth. Unlike Australia, and Australians, they have to show up because whether they like it or not. Bangladeshis can actually stay and sleep through the day if they want to, but they didn't. 85% of people showed up. Previously 74.97 in case of 2001 and 75% in 1996. Suddenly it has come down to, according to official statement, there were 39 to 40% people voting. But if you look at my chart, what I said that it is about 18%. Why? Because if you take out these 40%, out of the places where the election actually took place, that is 147 constituencies. So if you transpose that into the total number of voters, which we are comparing with when we are talking about 2001 or 2008 or 1996, it's just half of it. So it's close to 18% of the voters who exercise their rights in the election. Now what happened since then? I mean, these are the reasons that I'm saying that First of all, the election itself is interesting, but one of the interesting and worrisome development is the post 2014 and particularly post 2008 leading up to the election is the extrajudicial killing. Extrajudicial killings are not new in case of Bangladesh. Since 2004, Bangladesh has been witnessing it. There has been gradual but very disturbing trend of the rise of the extrajudicial killing. But since 2002, the numbers, 2002 there were 91 cases. 2012 there were 91 cases. In 2013 there were 208 cases. You can see the exponential rise of it. And in 2013 we saw the political violence. The opposition was trying to stop the election, and we have seen 208. In 2014, that is last year, 154 people were killed, 54 of them died while in police custody. And 2014 is considered as one of the relatively calmer, politically speaking, relatively calmer year in Bangladesh in the last 5-6 years. In a relatively calm year, 154 people were killed by law enforcement agencies in an extrajudicial manner. In the first 3 months of the 2015, this year, law enforcement agencies have killed 64 people in separate incidents of crossfire in 3 months alone, when there was a heightened political violence. If those are not the worry, let us look at how this has been accepted and becoming a norm. There are tacit, and I put a question mark, I don't know whether I should call it tacit or explicit, indemnification. Attorney General, who is supposed to be holding the high standards of the law, was telling in 3rd of February that the officers should instantly retaliate by shooting at those who throw bombs at transport convoys. Yes, of course, no one should condone throwing bombs, but even criminals have their rights, don't they? Until they are tried under the rule of law, they can be allegedly criminals, and the rule of law does not require someone to be shot at sight. One of the Deputy Inspector General of Police said that not only shall you fire at them, but their family members too should be annihilated. I give you this order and the liability is mine. That doesn't speak of law, right? Does it? Second worrying development is this enforced disappearance. In 2010, there were 18 incidents. In the following year, it went to 30. In 2012, it came down a little bit to 24. In 2013, there were 53 incidents and 88 incidents in case of 2014. I put it in red for a reason. Again, let us remember that in 2014, after the election, the opposition was practically subdued, and opposition had no strength or appeal to the public. Let me put it this way, BNP lost appeal because they were engaged in violence, and hence people were not accepting them as their program, so they had to step back. And throughout the 2014 there was no opposition activities. Yet 88 individuals reportedly disappeared, and reportedly those are picked up by the law enforcement agencies, members of the law enforcement agencies. This year, in the first 3 months, there are 25 incidents reported by the relatives and family members where members of the law enforcement agencies have picked up people. These are the facts, these are just, what we see are the worrying part of it. But more so, in terms of what are the tendencies that is growing, is much worrying to me. If you look at these two pictures, one, which is on your left of the screen, this is an uprising that we saw in 2013, a place called Shahbag, a city square, which is commonly referred to in international media as an uprising of the secularists, demanding justice for those who committed war crimes in 1971. On the right is a gathering of the Islamists, conservative Islamists, who have gathered in May in Dhaka, not only opposing this secularist movement but also demanding stricter Islamic laws in Bangladesh. What is interesting is this rise of these two forces. Now we have seen two conflicting discursive frames. All things are in Bangladesh seems to be somehow feeding into these two elements. These two frames, what they are trying to do or that they've done in some ways, either intentionally or inadvertently, is that currently there seems to be clearly either you belong to this camp or you belong to that kind of camp, that kind of a situation. Everything is framed when you are talking about the history of Bangladesh, role of the religion and public sphere, or justice to the International Crimes Tribunal, which was established in 2010. Everything is now framed in this fashion, that this is that, and one is opposed to another. So what I describe those is, on the one hand, is this hyper-nationalist secularist movement, what I described as Shahbag movement. For them, this is the recapturing of the spirit of liberation. Indeed, they have their arguments, but essentially what it turned out to be, when the uprising started, it was in a justified ground, demanding justice for those, who have committed war crimes. They should not be, the court should not be lenient towards them, and there should be an end to the culture of impunity. I have no disagreement with that. Most of the Bangladeshis don't have disagreement with that. And their massive support, they have attracted millions of people, not only in Bangladesh, outside. But what essentially then it started to transform into is this movement has offered a particular interpretation of history and, of course, the present political crisis. So if you critique them, then it becomes a marker that, oh, you are anti-liberation. It's an easy, simple solution to this. Any criticism of International Crimes Tribunal processes, and I'm not talking about the tribunal itself, the moral standing of the International Crimes Tribunal should not be questioned, and I do not want to question them. Because if you have committed war crimes, they should be brought to justice. There is no doubt in it. And there is a long history to it. Why now? We can go into those, but in any case, on the moral ground, International Crimes Tribunal has never been questioned, should not be questioned. I understand those, some people might, but I'm not one of them. But that should not be seen that the processes, any legal process, and for that matter, any political process, any processes can be questioned to rectify those shortcomings, addressing those shortcomings. Now, any criticism of the process of ICT see that opposition to the justice for the genocide victims. It's not. And within this, that patriotism of the critiques of within this frame is suspect, always suspect. If I'm questioning, my patriotism is questioned. If I'm questioning, I'm critiquing as if I do not support the Bangladesh or Bangladesh movement. So, on the other hand, the Islamists have portrayed this Shahbag movement, which is a, yes, hyper-nationalist, yes, a secularist movement. They have put it as the Shahbag as an atheist, anti-Islamic movement, which it is not. Challenge to their agenda means that as if I'm trying to demean the Islam. For them, anything that they say, they produce, their discursive frame is the Islamic one, and questioning them is nothing but demeaning Islam. So my faith is suspect. Either my patriotism or my faith. This is the two discursive frames that we have seen, and these two frames, I think it's not only contrived, it's in many ways this idea that there's anti-liberation genocide denial versus the atheist anti-Islamic. This is dividing the nation. And dividing the nation to that extent that this doesn't help a nation to go forward. As I said in my title, is it walking back? There is a necessity for justice, but at the same time, dividing the nation in the name of religion is not helpful in any way. And we must, for the record, just let me mention that what is happening is another element of violence is since this International Crimes Tribunal started. International Crimes Tribunal was established in 2010. Awami League came into power in 2008. In their election campaign, they promised it. There was a huge public support to it, and the tribunal was established. The tribunal wants to, and it was established with an intention of trying those who committed war crimes in 1971 when Bangladesh was independent. In 1971, during the War of Independence, there are a number of people who have committed war crimes because millions of people were killed. Hundreds and thousands of women were violated. And the crimes against humanity was committed. Unfortunately, the international community has failed to take into account, and this impunity, the culture of impunity, continued. There was genocide, there is a Holocaust, and there is genocide in Rwanda and Cambodia. All have been taken care of in the sense at least addressed. But unfortunately, 1971 war crimes were not addressed by international community. So it was incumbent on Bangladeshis to address it, however late it is. There is no late of addressing these crimes against humanity. If you have committed crimes against humanity, you have committed crimes against humanity. But Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami, the Islamist party, feels that this is against them in large measure because their decision in 1971 not to support Bangladesh movement, not only that, they actually actively participated as an organization, and some of its leadership actually participated in committing those heinous crimes. But they think that this is a political vendetta. And hence, when the International Crimes Tribunal started in 2010, they have said that it needs to be scrapped. And since the verdict started to come out in 2013, February, they have been engaged in violence, perpetrated violence, mostly against the innocent civilians, in some cases against the police and others, but they are demanding that that this International Crimes Tribunal be scrapped. Notwithstanding the flaws and inadequacies of the process, ICT has, as I said, the moral standing. So Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami is part of that violence. Now, this kind of situation, on the one hand, the state's heavy-handedness, on the other hand, the opposition's proclivity towards engaging in violence, creates an environment within which militant groups fester. They thrive. Political uncertainty and acceptance of violence create a situation which would allow and which has allowed the Bangladeshi militant groups, Islamist militant groups, to re-emerge. Bangladesh experienced that in 2005, 2006. It was tamed, and as you know, no militant groups can be annihilated. It never does. Wherever they emerge, there seems to have 300 different lives, and they would come back in some form or other. So taming them, controlling them, and making sure that the nation has a strategy to deal with this, both military and non-military one. CT, that is counter-terrorism strategies, should not only be dependent on the military part of it. Bangladesh have been addressing those things quite well. Again, perfect? No. But they have done it very well since 2006. Particularly, I give credit to the 2007-2008 caretaker government, which started this one, and subsequently Awami League in its first term continued. But now, with the growing political uncertainty since 2013, we have seen the re-emergence. Who are the ones who are becoming victims? Those who have been writing and who have been named, or at least we can claim them or describe them as bloggers. These independent, free-minded people, in some cases, some of them are very critical of Islam, understandably. Freedom of expression is as such that some people will be very offensive. But they have the right to be offensive. once you do not allow someone to be offensive on something, next day you cannot be offensive on anything else. And we have seen since 2013, 9 of them have been killed, and particularly one in 2013, and then this year alone, and we are not done with the year yet, we have seen 3 incidents that are high profile, or at least popularly known, critique of religion and particularly Islam have been hacked to death in public place in Dhaka. One of them is Avijit Rai, who was based in the United States, in Atlanta, who traveled to Bangladesh to attend a book fair, the National Book Fair in February, including his own publication, and ended up being hacked to death in public on an evening right outside Dhaka University campus, next to the book fair. And there are 84 bloggers who have been identified, the militant Islamist groups, as blasphemous, and as I say, 9 of them have so far been. What is interesting is this, that on the one hand, these are the ones who are becoming threat to the freedom of speech, freedom of expression. In some cases, the government is not taking necessary steps. I would say not only, most of the cases, government is failing to take necessary steps to protect these bloggers who have been very critical of the Islam, religion, and so on and so forth. As a matter of fact, this is the one part of the story. On the other hand, government is using what they call as Information and Communication Technology Act, since it was originally framed in 2006 and amended in 2013, which can restrict your freedom of speech, and this has been used. Irony is, this has been used against the bloggers too, who are the target of the Islamist militant group. Instead of protecting them, some of them have victim twice by the militant groups and then the government. But these are the ones that we are seeing the challenges to the freedom of speech. Now, let me just briefly talk about where the nation is going or where it can go. I see 3 scenarios under the current situation. One I call muddle through. Number 2, I call it go from flawed democracy to authoritarianism. Or the third one is the political settlement. Muddle through means business as usual. What we have seen over the last 3-4 years, the opposition has been practically decimated, or at least subdued. And most of the opposition leaders are currently either jailed or in hiding. The BNP has been marginalized, mostly because of the heavy-handed policies of the government, but in part of their own makings, because they have failed to adopt a strategy that would involve popular support. Increasingly, this is the situation, and I think if this is continued, what they call muddle through, this would fragment the BNP. Ruling party expects that, but a portion of BNP might be pushed into adopting radical tactics, which would make Bangladesh more volatile. Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami, which is the largest Islamist party, effectively be pushed into underground since 2008, 2009, particularly 2010. And if that continues, which is likely, then more radical Islamist group will emerge and vie for the space the Jamaat-e-Islami is leaving. There will be some efforts to anti-government movement, which is not going to succeed, but add political uncertainty. State institutions have begun to lose moral legitimacy because they are no longer considered by common citizens as protecting them, instead viewed as they are protecting the ruling regime. State institutions should not be viewed by the citizen as such, which is very worrying development. Government will have to rely or be reliant on the coercive power, and it might actually encourage a kind of circling around, meaning government become repressive and opposition become more violent, militant group flourishes. My second one is that basically what I am arguing that the current muddle through would not actually stay there. It's a slippery slope. And that creates the loop of violence, heavy-handedness, repression, and violence, and more violence, some sponsored by the state, or state is using violence to subdue the opposition and the militant group, and militant group finds the legitimacy or at least excuse. So my second one is that this would gradually wane the constitutional opposition party. If it goes on like this for longer period, it would decimate the BNP, and vacuum would likely be filled through the radical and extremist forces rather than the constitutional parties. There are militant groups which are proscribed, which are now, some of them defunct, some of them are not. They might re-emergence, gain more force. Ruling party would adopt harsher measures, impose restriction. That would deepen the polarization. As I said, independent civil society will gradually fade, cease to exist, and authoritarian tendencies would become very palpable. Why? Because then that is the only way the cycle works. Government becomes repressive, opposition tries to violently adopt. That gives legitimacy or rationale for the government to be more repressive, and that becomes, it's a vicious cycle, you cannot get out of it. And there will be discontent, and this discontent, when it cannot be found an expression, ways out of the constitutional measures. That would mean extra-constitutional measure. And that is a dangerous path that the country can move. When the country is achieving such a wonderful economic progress, yet that does not guarantee that this kind of political situation would allow to continue that progress. The third option, or the third, what I called, or borrowing from Professor Rahman Sobhan, an eminent Bangladesh expert on Bangladesh economy and political economy to be precise, I'm calling it a political settlement. What Professor Rahman Sobhan has described, that the way out is a political settlement. A political settlement among political parties and members of the civil society is reached, which recreates a more inclusive political order underwritten by a fairly acquired democratic mandate. Fairly acquired democratic mandate and inclusive political order. These are the two elements. And to do so, what I'm suggesting, that if the country needs to move in this direction, if it wants to move in this direction, and that is the decision the political leaders, particularly the ruling party, will have to make. If they have to move in that direction, first of all, the two scenarios that I've talked about, first and the second, those require nothing to be done. It would, by the default itself, are those two scenarios. And the third scenario that I'm calling political settlements means they'll have to be proactive. Someone will have to take the initiative. What they need to do, first, what I call steps to ensure a fairly acquired democratic mandate. And I'm borrowing this term from Professor Rahman Sobhan, that fairly acquired democratic mandate is necessary, which means whatever the way, it doesn't have to be tomorrow, but there has to be some steps taken in this regard. Halting the erosion of fundamental rights and restoration of democratic space for the democratic constitutional parties. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, movement needs to be restored. These are restrained, and space has been shrinking quite fast. If the democratic space is constrained, if the space is restrained, if the democratic space shrunk and continue to shrinking, the future is not good. The third one, bringing an immediate end to this unaccountable and excessive use of state's coercive power, extrajudicial killing, enforced disappearance. These things need to be stopped, because it has created a culture of fear. A culture of fear has been created. The fourth one that I'm mentioning is because violence. Opposition has adopted violence as the only means of political activities. That is not a constitutional political party should do. They can justify it by saying that the government is restraining them and they have very limited space, but that does not justify them. They have to work hard to reach out, and they should renounce unequivocal renunciation of violence by all political parties, including the opposition. And finally, strengthening the institutions to protect the fundamental rights of the citizen, including exercising the right to vote freely. This is essential. Institutions need to be built, as currently the institutions which are entrusted with protecting the fundamental rights are weak, feeble, ineffective, and has no appeal to the government, opposition, or citizens. Citizens do not see those institutions as their safeguard. So those are the things that needs to be done. And here I stop. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely timely, just as I was about to scribble. Okay, thank you very much for that extremely analytical presentation. I'll now, of course, open the floor to questions, and we will begin with Professor Mitra. We will also end with Professor Mitra because he will provide the final assessment, but you shall have the floor.
Before I say anything else, let me tell you how wonderful it is to hear a talk of this kind of lucidity and clarity. I am also asked to talk from time to time, so you have from me my compliments tinged with envy. Well done. For non-political scientists here, please note a very important point that underpins this talk: the state. A lot of things happen in public life because there is a fixed point called the state. If the state does not have the monopoly of legitimate violence, then why should I pay my taxes? Why should I drive on the wrong side? Why should I not? So this fixity of the state is now in question in Bangladesh. That brings me to two problematic issues that we get from this talk. First, look at the title. The title says, the title of the talk is Moving Forward or Walking Back. If you think of it in physical terms, you'd see in it a certain fixed model, that there's a linearity that you go from to. And the talk is saying, in terms of that fixed model, we are not sure what is happening to Bangladesh. Now, is the model itself unproblematic? Can it be seen as a fixed point? Because Bangladesh is not alone. Look at Sri Lanka. Starts on a high note of secularism, give them a chance, they vote it down. Look at India. After all these years, the Hindu nationalists are in power. So that a lot of people are willing to kill or die in the name of Islam cannot automatically be called going back, because in their minds, well, they are not going back. They are going forward to a goal which was not born in Westphalia or in the British Parliament. Who is to tell, in the name of democracy, that people should want one thing and should not want another thing? So, if you look outside of Bangladesh, you have to question the model of nation building which has been given to us by people who also shed a lot of blood. But that bloodshed was done before they became states. Where I used to teach, Heidelberg was the high point of bloodshed between Catholics and Protestants. But of course now they can preach to us that thou shalt not shed any blood in the name of politics. So the question is, nation states are telling state nations how to be. All our South Asian states are state nations. The British left, we became states. And then we are told, now become nations, now become this, now become that. But please don't do it the way we did it. So we have here a theoretical problem of the first order. That's the general problem. Within the generality, Bangladesh is even a very transient case of a misunderstood national revolution. After all, Bangladesh is the only South Asian state which fought for its independence. To the rest, independence was transferred. These people fought and shed their own blood. Now, what was that bloodshed for? What was that basic value for? Did that basic value have a chance to get institutionalized? Over lunch, we are talking about the war crimes trial, which is 44 years too late. In Germany, there was the Nuremberg trial where the basis of denazification was laid. So we have to look at Bangladesh in comparative and theoretical terms. That's the first problematic issue that Professor Riaz is raising. The second one is even more problematic and mischievous. As Ambassador Chaudhary reminded us, Bangladesh is way ahead of large parts of India in terms of public service delivery. I have said it in writing. Why does Indian democracy deliver votes but not toilets? More Indians have mobile phones than access to a toilet. In Bangladesh, all said and done, remember the basket case analogy of Kissinger. I was a student then when the Liberation War was fought, and it used to anger me, but I didn't have any evidence. Today we have it. Steady, constant rate of growth. So, what is wrong with a flawed democracy if it can deliver that? Okay, I'll leave it there.
Okay. Would you like to respond to this immediately, or do you want to take a couple of more questions?
Let's take a couple of more. And
Okay. Dipinda, did I see your hand? Yeah.
Just a couple of questions. I'll just pick on one point which Professor Mitra raised towards the end. Any metric on, I come from a development economics perspective, and Bangladesh has been a remarkable success story on most development metrics. If you look at women's literacy, health indicators, other indicators of public service delivery, women's status in general, and this debunked the Washington consensus in large measure. Could you talk a little bit about how the current environments impacted that? And if you're inclined to, about the genesis of this, and what is it that's enabled Bangladesh to do, which has most countries on the planet have not been able to do? On a different note, you mentioned the breakdown of trust as one of the three major factors. The other was the absence of institutions, stable institutions, which would establish democratic credentials, and a breakdown of political understanding between the two parties. If I were to construe trust as an outcome, as an endpoint rather than a starting point, what is it that's transpired over the last 2 years that's led to this breakdown or understanding between the two parties? I mean, there's been a to and fro for a very long time now. And the third point was, sorry.
No, that's all right. As long as you say the third point quickly.
Okay, right. External influence on fundamentalism. This is specifically referring to Wahhabism, the impact on Indonesia, a lot of North African states. Are there any concerns about funding or influence through other means in Bangladesh as well? It's been a remarkably secular society otherwise, far more stable than its larger neighbor. Thank you.
Good. You take these two, then we'll have Sujin and Surya in the next round.
Okay, sure. I mean, 2 points are in somewhat related. The one that Professor Mitra raised and Settle, you raised in regard to the flawed democracy and economic growth. How did Bangladesh achieve? Often it is described as the paradox, right? The economic growth that achieved despite the malgovernance, so to say, lack of governance, bad governance, however you put it. The genesis of economic growth are few-fold. Let me put it this way. First of all, if you look at the economic growth of Bangladesh, it is since 1991, when the democratization process started. And since then, power has alternated between two major political parties through a system which was described as a caretaker government. So somewhat an institution was built, however feeble that institution, which allowed transfer of power or institutional ways or mechanism of transfer of power. Now, the economic growth, as I said, since started 1991. Since then, regime has changed. There has been power alternated. But overall, the economic policies of these regimes have remained somewhat similar, particularly when addressing two issues. Number one, the welfare aspect of the state. And number two is to achieving the growth potential by opening up the private sector as much possible. These are the two state-centric interventions. And this was facilitated by the presence of non-governmental organizations, particularly the development organizations, such as Grameen Bank, such as BRAC, such as Proshika, and there are many. So they created an environment through education, through making sure that there is a entrepreneurial effort from the women and others. All these things allowed this to happen. So the economic growth potential, the genesis is there. Genesis is a continuation of a system which is spoiled but workable when they are alternating the powers, right? That brings us to the question that what is the problem with the flawed democracy? So long it is democracy, it is flawed. So as of now, the system delivered because everyone had a stake. And everyone wanted to have a part of the pie, and they knew that they are going to have a part of the pie. It's not a perfect system. That is, the corruption is extreme. But when everyone has a system, this spoils shared by two parties or maybe more than two parties, gave them the incentive to maintain this system. Now, if that flawed democracy is gone and there is an absence of the stakeholders, what would it have? That's my concern. That would this progress with this growth be continued? Because now there is no checks and balance in some ways. That is where I see the relationship. Bangladesh's economic success is a contribution of state, private sector, non-governmental organization, and ingenuity of the people. I call there are three major elements of Bangladesh's economic growth. One is one specific industry called ready-made garments. Now it has been diversified, there are others, but it started with that. Second is the remittance, meaning those who have migrated, short-term migration, has allowed the money to go back. And the third element of that is the success of the agricultural sector. The peasants have provided food on the table of a growing number of population. Bangladesh was established, was independent, became independent in 1971 with 75 million people. 1974, Bangladesh saw a devastating famine. Now Bangladesh has 160 million people, yet Bangladesh is feeding itself. Not a single inch of land has increased, rather it has decreased because of the population and other development activities, not to mention urbanization. Then what is happening? Someone is doing something right. Okay. There's the peasant.
Switching and then, sorry.
I have two questions, and first one is again the issue of the absence of the state. If there is the absence of the state to respond to political uncertainty, then my question is whether there is any international communities force or demand the Bangladesh state to respond to such violence. And my second question is about the origin and the role of ICT, And I heard from you that it's pretty significant to generate pros and cons dealing with the war crime trial. And what was the background of setting up that institution in 2010, which is pretty recently, and how has it contributed to dealing with the political violence?
So, yeah.
I have three aspects to be considered in respect of each of the three scenarios. Yeah, in respect of each of the three scenarios. The first scenario of muddling through, what will be the end game, for want of a better word? Will that be a failed state? And secondly, in terms of authoritarianism, what kind of authoritarianism? Will it be a hybrid civil-military authoritarianism, or will it be civilian authoritarianism, or just plain military authoritarianism? And third, in terms of the wish list you have for a political settlement, who will be the arbiter? Will it be another caretaker government or the international community through some form of international intervention? Thank you.
Let me quickly respond few of the things, few unanswered things. In regard to the violence and the international community's response, international community has been requesting, pleading, begging, take your pick, to stop the violence and have a consensus at least on the modus operandi of conducting a fair and participatory election. That was before 2014 election. Since 2013, United States, United Nations, European Union, and other international bodies have repeatedly requested the political parties to come to consensus. And there was a mission from the United States led by Taranko, which didn't work out. So that has been the case with the international community response. Still, the international community is working, trying as hard possible to convince particularly the incumbent that there is a necessity. But given the weaknesses of the opposition and governments to certain extent success in weakening the opposition, they do not see any reason to have a dialogue. So that's, I'll come back to the ICT issue. Now, International Crimes Tribunal was originally conceived soon after the independence of Bangladesh in 1973. There were tribunals that were established, but initially the idea was to try those who were members of Pakistan military. There was a list produced by Bangladesh government with specific charges against individuals that they would be tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity. But then again, this couldn't happen because given the circumstances, there was a tripartite agreement between Bangladesh, India and Pakistan in regard to transferring the prisoner of war, 94,000 or so of them. And that didn't allow Bangladesh to continue with this, since with the war crimes trial. There were their accessories, and so everything started to fall apart. And then there was a political change in 1975. Military coup d'etat allowed to bring a government which was more interested in their term reconciliation without saying that one. And political expediency is the right word in this context. That expedient political move by military regimes and the civilian political parties precluded any possibility of having a war crime trial until there was a massive popular grassroots movement demanding it. That led to the 2008 election, where Awami League promised that if they are voted to power, they are going to start the war crimes trial. And there was a huge popular support which enabled Awami League to come to the power. So this was their election commitment, and 2010 they started it. Now, this is the background. This is how it started. Uh, as I said, I repeatedly say that the moral standing and necessity of having this war crime trial cannot be questioned. I do not want to, and I do not think anyone should. International community has failed miserably in dealing with this, I must say. Now that when the international community asks for a fair trial, they have the right to do so, but they should also be cognizant of their failure. That does not preclude, should not preclude for criticizing, if necessary, of the procedural flaws of the system. Has that been used by for the political end? I am afraid that this process has been, directly or indirectly, has been used for political end, which is a disservice to the cause it is supposed to serve. I understand it's a very nuanced position because it doesn't fit into the simple box, yes, no. Finally, in regard to the breakdown of trust, I will come back to this briefly. The breakdown of trust is, the recent one is not new in the sense that there has been always a lack of trust, because there is no institution to mediate and create this trust. If Bangladesh had a very strong election commission, as it is in case of India, independent, powerful, robust, then this would have been immaterial, the trust issue. That's why if you look at the three things that I've said, one of them is the modus operandi of transferring the power. If you create those institutions, and that the absence of institutions has come to this, there was a semblance of thing, is this caretaker government, which is not a permanent solution. It cannot be a permanent solution. Institutions have to be built. Failure to build an institution and then take away whatever you had created this situation. Three scenarios. What is the end product of the first muddle through? Muddle through will lead us to the second one. That's my understanding. Meaning that I do not think muddle through is a scenario that can be there for a long time. It is a gradual erosion would lead to what I am calling as from flawed democracy to authoritarianism. All flawed democracy end up in authoritarianism? Most of them do. In case of Bangladesh, I am more concerned about a populist authoritarianism rather than a military dictatorship, to be very precise. Because the issues that we see in front of the country and the way the country has been, unfortunately, been divided on various issues, unresolved issues, this creates an environment within which a populist authoritarian regime can emerge. That would be unfortunate, and in my judgment, that would defeat the very foundation of the Bangladesh independence. In 1971, Bangladesh was not established for the case. Last one is the political settlement. Who will do it? Bangladeshis will have to do it. International community can help, but they cannot impose. However, regional governments have more role to play. Particularly, India has a more role to play, particularly given that in 2014 election, which in some ways has contributed, in a robust way it contributed to this situation, was supported by India. They bought into the argument of the constitutional continuity argument of the incumbent. They might have their own arguments too, but the point is, given the presence of India, given that India is a regional power and aspiring global power, or maybe they consider themselves as a global power, that brings more responsibility to them. India as a democratic nation cannot actually allow its neighbors to be faltering in democracy and buy into argument which India itself would not buy into. Would India buy into the argument that let's get rid of democracy for the sake of economic growth? I don't think India would accept that one. If India cannot accept that one for itself, why should it allow or encourage or would not object to the idea when they have enormous influence given its regional location and as a Bangladesh responsible neighbor? So to answer to your question, Bangladeshis will have to do it, international community can help. The regional powers, particularly India, has to play a pivotal role.
Okay, Aisha. Louder.
Thank you. If you could just clarify the sudden outburst of Islamic extremism, what drove it? Is it a response to deprivation? Is it a response to what's happening in the international environment with regards to ISIS or what we call Daesh? And then, therefore, are there any strategies put in place by the state to specifically deal and kind of segregate international developments to domestic politics? Thank you.
Let me put it this way. I do not think you can separate these things that only domestic elements or international elements encourages militants. I think there is a combination of these things. And if I may take this opportunity to have a commercial break to advertise one of my books that came out in 2008 called Islamist Militancy in Bangladesh, a Complex Web, Routledge, but anyway, commercial is over. The point is where I have tried to show that there are combination of factors. Domestic, international, and regional. There are regional and extra-regional issues there, such as in case of Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, hostility does play a role. And militants do get weapons. They do not, it hasn't been rained, the weapons have not been rained on Bangladesh. So there is some connection somewhere it is coming. So there are routes. They need funding. They do not print the money or so they need, so there is a very complex picture. Now why this Islamist militancy is there has been previous occasions, as I said, in 2005-6 there has been rise of this militancy. There are various kind of militant groups, but the state action has tamed them, and counterterrorism strategy helped them to address this issue. Now why they are coming back? Of course international development is one factor of them. But I think that one of the major elements, I'm not saying the element, but one of the major elements is the political uncertainty and violence within the country, which allows, had there been a very stable political situation, and if there were a consensus between the opposition and the ruling party and the society at large, how it should be addressed, then it would have been far more easier. Nobody should encourage in any way, and I don't think they are intentionally encouraging militancy, but their default action might be leading to that. So to answer to your question, that
yeah, okay. Before I give the floor to Professor Mitra, because we will have to finish by 4:30, I just wanted to make a few points. One is we haven't actually raised the possibility, of alternatives within the state, because there are elements within the state who are still actors, but who have not played the role kind of thing that you were sort of insinuating. What would be the ultimate? The problem with Bangladesh, of course, is that there's a dualism, there's a structural dualism in the concept itself, the structural dichotomy, because it comprises part your Muslimness and your Bengaliness, and that combined to bring Bangladesh on. Now, the two political parties that Professor Riaz spoke of, in some ways, seeks to represent one or the other element of this dichotomy, the Muslimness or the Bengaliness. Of course, in the middle, Bangladesh is a country where there's a strong middle class, and when we speak of caretaker governments, of which I was one, caretaker governments in some ways represented this middle class, or this Bhadralok class, who are professionals and who are called upon to deliver from time to time, usually every 5 years, to come in and hold the elections. But eventually, the slippery slope led to a huge political crisis in 2007, and then our caretaker government came into power, but not as a normal caretaker government, because we came in a period of emergency. Now, it's beginning of what you were saying, what happens ultimately. It was not a normal caretaker government. We didn't we were not in power for three months, but for 2 years. And we put an end to ourselves. In other words, we sort of decided when we were to leave by holding the elections, as Professor Riaz says, which was the last fair, acceptably fair elections. I mean, this is no boast, but it really happened. However, there is still an actor within the system which has not acted. This is the military. The military has not probably done it in Bangladesh because military is globally linked in many ways. Military is a part of the UN system, etc. Military plays a role in Africa and peacekeeping, etc. Thinks that their reputation is very important, and at this point in time, it does not want it to be soiled. But the time may come when all these alternatives have dried out, tested, and someday some of them might come and say, "Madam, enough is enough." You see, and then the democracy, I mean, which is again a perceptional kind of thing. I mean, we've seen it happen in Egypt. We've seen it happen in many other places. Is shelved for a period of time till such time as a new system can be put in place. That danger is always there. Whether it is dangerous or not, I don't know. I mean, but the point is, this is an apprehension that dare not speak its name in Oscar Wilde's words. You see, so that is always there. Everything has not been tried out and tested yet. And if what Aisha is talking about comes to fruition and there is a definite threat eventually, you see, you may see a response in kind of that nature. So the middle classes, of course, I mean, to react to Dipinder, I mean, state is not the only actor in the field. I mean, there also, as Professor Riaz has also said, that there is a civil society and there is a strong private sector in Bangladesh as well. But it is the duality, structural duality, that is causing many of these problems. And the structural duality might be contained in the same person. I mean, I could be partly a Muslim and partly a Bengali myself, and also religious at the same time. But anyway, these problems, I mean, no state is without problems, no system is without problems, no society is without problems. The problems will be there, and the ultimate answer is probably what your first scenario is. We will, as the British say, muddle through some way. Professor Mitra, for you to sum up now, and eventually deliver the...
I will start. I'll start by performing a very pleasant ritual, which is to give our guest a gift from the house. This is a couple of books by Dr. Chowdhury, Bangladesh, Reflections on an Emergent Nation, and the second one is Pakistan, a Diplomat's Insight. The Bengali speaking here would understand if I say this is Ganga Jale Ganga Puja, worshipping Goddess Ganges water, but we are very proud of our homegrown knowledge, and we are very proud of counting you as honorary family. Thank you very much. I would like to take this opportunity also to thank you for the insights, please, the insight that you have provided us. And I say insight for a specific reason, at which point I look at Surya, because we have several publications here, insights, briefings, longer standalone working papers, and so on. Insights are, I've come to realize now in the short span of 6 weeks, punchy, specific pieces which provide what no one else is providing. I mean, what is said today about the relationship between stakeholderness and flawed democracy, and how to keep flawed democracy dynamic, is an insight I have just got myself and noted down. So I would request you on behalf of the House to please give us a contribution by the way of an insight, and we will process it fairly quickly, and you'll be enlightening at least 10,000 people, because that's how large our distribution list is, and it's getting larger all the way. I would also like to, I take it as an as a yes.
The silence is a yes.
No, that's fine. I'd be honored.
It's a very legally dodgy proposition. I'm very grateful also for the conversation that your paper has generated here. We are trying to become distinctive and exceptional among the hundreds of South Asia institutes of the world. I would like word to spread that one goes to ISAS because one gets good conversation there. The conversation we got today around this table, which is generated from our own house, is for me, as a long-standing student of South Asian politics, precious and a contribution. You have also shown how rich area studies can be for the generation of challenges to old theory. Issues like nation, state, democracy, trust, development are larger theoretical issues to which an area can be an excellent entry point, like trust. Trust is not a contract. Trust is given. And only if there is trust, contract can be signed. All of you who have done some law would know that at the end of every law, there is a point where contracts have to be enforceable. If there is no trust in that enforcing mechanism, a contract is just a piece of paper. So, the game theoretic issue, why do you trust trust? Is trust given or can it be generated? Now, this is an excellent area of research. The method I want this house to develop is, when boy meets girl, like when area meets theory. How much can you understand an area in terms of general theory, and how what you don't understand you can use to question general theory, like the fractured personality of the Bangladeshi middle class, which Ambassador Chaudhary called the duality. Islam and secular values. Why is it a problem in Bangladesh and not in the United States? Remember the dollar, in God we trust? That's okay. Why is it okay there? Why not here? This is the kind of fundamental theoretical question that areas can generate. It gives me hope, having heard you all today, particularly our young generation. I've spent 3 terrific days harassing Johnson and today Prof. Mukherjee, and also on Sunday, trying to identify 17 different projects that we should be able to send out in the first cut. What kind of project? Take an idea, develop it into a proposal for an international workshop so that we can have, like the likes of Professor Riaz, and come and spend an entire day debating the various aspects of a society, of a state, society, economic, foreign affairs, and so on, and anticipate a good publication out of it, or a bunch of insights, a bunch of working papers. If we do it systematically, word will spread that ISAS is what Johnson would like us to be, a knowledge hub, knowledge trust, so that ISAS can become the Singapore of South Asian institutes. What is the value-added character of Singapore? It has to import sand and water, but it does generate a lot of capital, a lot of energy. I would like ISAS to be that kind of research institute so that we can live peacefully with our dual personality, which is, Ambassador, give God what is God and give Caesar what is Caesar.
Caesar what is Caesar's.
Ministries what they want, and give anyways what it wants in terms of value-added character to knowledge. We can't do it all ourselves. I'm also designing a core which you had here, researchers, a periphery, people who belong to us but only partly, who come here occasionally, and a global pool of experts such as yourself, whom we could invite to join us for episodic, temporary, specific conferences. And that is how we can do a lot with the little that were given by our paymaster. Thank you for reviving my own faith in ISAS.
Thank you.